Hi, kitty cats. I am Amethyst Herrick, your hostess for Gender Identity Weekly, a weekly discussion about identity and gender from the contributors and guests of the Purple Pop Publications website, genderidentitytoday.com. This content right here is brought to you by subscribers of genderidentitytoday.com. If you are already a subscriber, first of all, thank you so much for your ongoing support. You know very well that not only do you receive new content directly to your email inbox as soon as we publish it, but you're also able to interact with every contributor on the site directly, which includes me, and for crap's sake, who doesn't want to interact with somebody like I am, huh? So, if you would like to contribute to support shows just like this one, as well as other podcasts, videos, and written articles by our contributors, please consider subscribing using the links you're going to find in the show notes. Well, I am exceptionally excited to welcome my guest today, David Beckemeyer. Hi, David.
Hi, Amy. How you doing?
I am doing okay. But, we talked about this earlier, and neither of us is, right?
Right. Not really. Not really.
So David is, I love this phrase, or this term, I don't know, calls himself a bridge builder, and David is also host of the Outrage Overload podcast. You and I talked about on your podcast, and it'll come out at some point, but around the same time that this one does. But I love this podcast. It's a podcast for people tired of media outrage. I learned the term outrage porn from you. If you can believe that, but because part of the thought that I had, most people get outraged when their really core identity gets challenged. But I don't think that's what your podcast is about, interestingly. So I have a ton of questions. But let me start off. I love origin stories. Obviously, you got interested in the idea of outrage porn, and you wanted to uncover this in the media today. Like, what happened? Was it like early years of, David's growing up and goes, gosh, you seem really outraged. I better do something about this when I grow up. What happened in your life that got that interest going?
Yeah. So for me, we had the 2016 election, and a lot of people got pretty freaked out about that. And that, and then we had and so there was that going on, and people are sort of, breaking friendships. They're blocking people on Facebook, social media, and then also in real life, right? And then you had the 2020 pandemic, and you kind of had lockdowns and people fighting about that. You had people fighting about the vaccines. And again, there was more waves of people disconnecting, breaking connections and separating. Like I say, Facebook, blocking people on Facebook or Instagram, and then also in real life. I mean, it seems like everybody I talk to has been doing this show for a few years now, and everybody I talk to has a story about how, I don't talk to my brother-in-law so-and-so anymore, or Uncle Larry is not allowed to fake Thanksgiving anymore,
Right.
Everybody seems to have stories like that, right? And so there was that kind of going on and circling my sphere, and then I'm caught up in it as well, right? And it's getting closer and closer to my life. I'm out there on Twitter getting in Twitter fights for no good reason, and then people in my life are starting to see those kind of things where they're breaking those connections, and like lifelong friendships, things like that, all going away. So all that kind of caused me to kind of pause. One of the big final straws really was my son, who's a millennial, who typically pretty active on social media, and he said one day, I'm not on social media anymore, and I'm like, what? Like, how'd that work? And so we had a conversation about that, because that's a pretty big deal for his generation to just go off social media like that, right?
Yeah.
So then we had a conversation about that, and it was for a lot of these kind of reasons, right? I mean, he found himself getting in Facebook fights and stuff like that. And at some point, not even to care about the issue anymore. Now it's just like, I actually like the fight. Like, I'm just going in these fights so I can see the reaction I can cause and other stuff like that. And that's not like him at all. He's totally not that person, right? That's just not who he is. And so so that was a big deal. And I said, well, you know what? What's going on here with all this, right? And so as I started looking into it, I thought, well, there is people studying this, right? And I thought, well, I'm a science nerd. I'm a science geek. I'm a STEM guy. And so, well, maybe we can start with what's going on in academia and in research on that. And that's kind of where I started. And so I saw there is a lot of people looking at at these things, and this kind of intuitive idea of kind of the outrage media and the outrage porn was there. But then as you look into the research, you see that people are actually, there's a lot of data and science being done on this. So that's kind of how all that started in it. And I said, well, what am I doing? I'm going to start a blog. How might I talk about this? And a podcast seems like a great way, because we have this opportunity here to go deeper, right? I can actually do and obviously you can do a 2-hour, 5-hour podcast. I don't know, whatever you want, but you can go a lot deeper than 2 minutes on a audio segment or Instagram reel. Although I think doing Instagram reels is probably a way. I mean, look at the people on TikTok doing that, right? So there's a whole audience where they're probably never going to listen to my 35-minute show, right? They're probably only going to get a 2-minute reel, but there is an audience for that deeper depth stuff. And you're seeing, I think, a resurgence of that. So that's how I settled on a podcast.
Yeah. So, I mean, you brought up, though, the idea that connections were being broken. I mean, and then you said your son went off social media. Which was the greater contributor? Was it? Did you lose any friends? I mean, I think that's a good question. Did you lose connections as a result of some of what happened in the last 8 years?
Yeah, I did, and I think that I've by going through this process of what I've done, I've tried to reestablish those, and apologize and reconnect with any of those cases like that. And it doesn't always work, but at least you can try it. So, at this point, I think those relationships are probably damaged, maybe forever, but they at least aren't completely destroyed at this point, or at least we're working on getting back together. And so absolutely. And I think everybody probably can say they have some of those kind of things going on.
Yeah. Oh, I definitely do. And it seems actually more, maybe I wasn't watching so closely in 2016 and in 2020, but certainly now it seems like it's very, very big. I mean, after this past election, people are like, "Oh my God, you voted for this person. There's no way we can be friends. I don't want you." Forget about Thanksgiving dinner. They're like, "I'm cutting you out of everything. My will. You're not my friend." It's crazy to me, and yet there are times when I go, "Well, that's justified." Right? I mean, like, how can some people have these beliefs? So it's hard to rectify the two.
Yeah.
I am curious. I mean, how do I want to bring this in? Let me ask you this question first, because I mean, I saw the phrase outrage porn. How do you see that media outrage is similar to the pornography industry? I mean, it's a crazy thought.
Yeah, for sure. So I didn't invent the term, but I have kind of expanded the definition to have my own kind of definition of it. And you were saying before that it kind of doesn't seem to have a connection to identity, and we can talk more about that, because I think it absolutely does. But I love the term because it captures two big aspects of all this, right? The outrage side is kind of a placeholder for media trying to trigger a bunch of emotions, right? Obviously, anger.
Rile us up.
Rile us up. Anger is a big one. Obviously, sort of moral indignation, this kind of stuff. So the outrage is kind of a placeholder for that. So they're trying to trigger those emotions on the one hand. And the porn part, I like that term part of it, because we are kind of addicted to it, right? I mean, we go get this stuff. We seek this stuff out. And many times we don't know we're doing that. Like, it's kind of subconscious, but and there's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the big ones comes back to this morality and identity piece, right? Because we have kind of selected our tribe, what we think are, what is this identity, whether that's exactly necessarily Democrat or Republican or some other kind of thing we think we're sort of gonna be with. And this is very innate part of our psychology, which you can talk about to whatever degree that you want. And I know a lot of this you already know, but so then once we have that tribe, right? So now we picked a side, and we like that certainty. That certainty makes us comfortable. We like that certainty that we have made the right moral choice. So by witnessing the other people doing these things that outrage us, that helps reinforce, oh yeah, see, I told you they're terrible. And now look, you're giving me more evidence that they're terrible. So we actually seek that kind of stuff out. And So that's why I like the term, right? Because it's two sides to that, right? There's a push and pull. We can't just completely blame the media because obviously we're consuming the stuff.
Right, right. I do. Okay, good. Because here's how I can pull this together. When I think about pornography, right? Because I mean, I'm not a huge consumer of pornography, but I do really enjoy sex. Like, it's hard to, like, you'll find some people that go, I don't really care for sex, and I get it. You know, there are asexual people, and for the most part, like, the pornography industry exists because what we've tried to do is suppress healthy sex, like the ability to say, oh, I like sex. Like, I mean, you can't say that in Christianity. You say that, they go, well, get out, there's the door, you know, we don't need you in here, we're not sexual beings, except we do want you to go out and make children so that we can continue this thing, go out and make soldiers for Christ, but other than that, don't have sex. So I guess my point is, like, pornography is there because we love sex but we don't want to admit it. Sex is a taboo subject. And so when I think about the idea of outrage porn, it's like this is not something that we want to admit is our identity. Like sex, you know, you don't want to go, I like, you know, big butts and I cannot lie, whatever, you know. We don't want to admit that. But we do want to go on social media and fight with each other. So anyway, go ahead.
No, I really like that because that's very true, right? Because I've in the beginning I was doing a lot of research about this, and then I've carried on to keep doing it. Where I have these interviews, I have interviews with just regular folks. So obviously, I have my expert interviews and all that, but I talk to just sort of man on the street kind of thing.
I was a regular folk, just so everybody knows. I was no way an expert, so keep going. Go ahead.
But and these are these aren't necessarily all things that come on the show, but they're just part of my research. So I'll just kind of talk with people and get their sense of how do they consume media and have they been affected by it, and what about do you recognize some of these things when you consume media?
Yeah.
And so many people that participate in these, talk about how, yeah, I don't like the vitriol. I don't like the, this kind of, I would like the temperature, lower the temperature and all that. But then at the same time, later on in the conversation, I'll usually start asking them some more hot button kind of questions. And then it just comes right back out again. It's like, so we say we want to get rid of it, but we also write almost in the same sentence, like participate in it and do it. So yeah, I think there is a lot of that. Like there are those extremes on the each side that probably will just tell you flat out that's what they do. But that's like the producer of Jerry Springer would probably say that, or would have said that years ago, right? But most of us don't say that, even though we participate in it, right? At the same time, and sometimes we actively participate in it, but more commonly, we don't really realize we're doing it. Like we have a blind spot to it when we're participating in it or when we're seeing our side do it. Like we're really critical of people on the other side doing it. We can recognize it. It's really easy to recognize when they're doing it. But when our side is doing it, it's much harder to recognize. And when we're doing it ourselves, it's much harder to recognize. And that's a big piece of what I've learned in a couple of years talking to a lot of experts on this show. And in those interviews, it gets reinforced, even though that's anecdotal. I'm not going to say that's a scientific thing, but it's something that I've witnessed quite a bit of.
Right. Well, what are some of the symptoms, though? Because you said that they will that you see patterns. What are some of these patterns? I'm curious.
Well, yeah, the biggest one is this idea. You suddenly get a big blind spot to it. We've been talking about outrage media and how they don't like it, and the other side does it a lot and all this kind of stuff. And then I'll maybe ask them a question like, and usually this is only after we built a rapport, because one pattern that I see a lot of, by the way, in the space is that people are really afraid to talk about, I don't know if afraid is quite the right word, but they're sort of hesitant to really share their views because I think they're used to being shot down and getting in an argument. So when I do these interviews, I'm really in listen mode, and I'm trying to actively listen to. Like a lot of times we say we're going to listen, but not really. We're just waiting so we can say something. Yeah. But in these, I don't push back. I don't try whatever, whatever their position is, even if it's pretty extreme. I don't push back. I just let them continue on. And once you've done that a little bit, they'll open up a little bit more because like, oh, he's not pushing back. And so, and one of the downside of that sometimes is you have this, they think there's like this approval, like it's like a tacit approval because I'm not pushing back. So I get a little bit nervous about that. But generally I just want them to go ahead and share. And so a couple things in there that are really, really recurring patterns a lot. One is that like they're kind of, it can be difficult. People are very hesitant to share these views because they're sort of expecting a fight. I guess that's the pattern of part one. And
right,
you're sort of expecting a fight, especially if they hold these views. I think another one is we sort of all see ourselves as the middle. We see ourselves as the sane, rational point on this, whatever the spectrum is, right?
Of course.
On the, on the x-axis, we're the sane point. And so even people that would hold, by most objective observers, pretty extreme views, they see themselves as kind of the rational, sane one. And everybody to the side of that is the extreme ones, right? Whichever way that goes. There's always somebody more extreme than you, I guess, no matter how far you're down that path. Because I've talked to folks that were sort of one step away from storming the Capitol, and yet they consider themselves they see themselves as kind of the rational middle.
Wow.
So that's a common kind of blind spot that we see, and I've learned there's some idea of that, like naive realism. It's kind of a version of what they call naive realism, where we kind of always assume we're the one who did the rational. The proper rationalization to arrive where we are, and that happens to everybody. Like I'm guilty of that too. We're all guilty of these biases. Yeah. I guess that's another big pattern, is realizing that we're all guilty of this stuff. There's nobody that wins or there's nobody that's better at it necessarily. Obviously, people that have had a lot of critical thinking training and spent a lot of time doing that, and have had to do scientific, learning about how to think scientifically, and independent of scientific facts, but they think scientifically and use scientific method. Those people are a little bit better at it for sure. But in general, we're all susceptible to these. These are normal human behaviors and human psychology, right? We're all susceptible to it.
Yeah.
So those are a couple of the biggies. But then you have a real blind spot when you're participating in it, and you can see that emotion almost trigger in them. Like what I'll do is as I walk through that process where I let them talk about a lot of different things, and we've sort of shared about how we're frustrated about this media environment, stuff like that. And then I'll say, well, if I always say if the conversation is going well, I will do this. But I've not yet have any of these not go to this point where I do ask these questions. So then at the end, what I'll say is something like, what's a hot button issue for you? Maybe I can do this now. Like, what's a hot button issue for you, Amy?
Oh, gosh. Okay. I mean, good question. I think the big hot button issue for me right this second is that, the incoming administration says they're going to make a national law that there are only two genders, and then use words that actually define sexes. So that sex and gender and their distinction is kind of a hot button issue for me. Did I just get emotional?
Not too bad, but I could see why. But actually, this is another thing we should probably pursue a little bit, because it's a little bit what you were saying in the beginning. And then I'll usually follow that up with, how when did you learn about this issue?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, it goes back till I was a kid. I was probably 8 years old when I was recognizing this, so certainly by 12 years old. And I'm actually thinking about me being transgender, as opposed to necessarily the distinction and how that plays out politically, on a global level and everything. But yeah, I started thinking about this 40 years ago, more than that, so.
Yeah, and I think in this case, the answer is going to be pretty easy on this one too. So then the other thing I ask is, do you think those information sources that you're using are giving you a fair counter argument?
A fair counter argument.
Yeah.
Sorry, counter argument to.
Well, to the opposite of your position. Do you think are you able to also find information that you would say would be, would maybe take the opposite of whatever your position is, and are you consuming or at least processing that information too? Okay.
I mean, interesting question, because I can probably say, not on purpose am I consuming that, but I get comments on my YouTube videos or whatever, comments on articles, that certainly present a counter argument. I think you asked, did I feel my sources were good? And I mean, my sources are biology professors in the 1980s. So I kind of go, well, yeah, I would hope so. But, because like the science of like biology has not changed a lot over the course of a couple hundred years at this point. We get more details, but, our basic understanding of some of these things. So, Did that answer your question?
Yeah, you can kind of get a sense of how that might go, though. I'll give you an example of some of the kinds of ones that I've had. That once we get to that question, like I had one person who, we were really, it was really an interesting, lot of, diversity and answers and all kinds of things, and ideas about diversity and ways of looking at the world. And when I asked the hot button issue, it was, I'm really upset about, what is it, the trans story time? What is it, the
not drag queens?
Drag queen story time. They were really upset about drag queen story time.
Sure.
And I'm like, kind of caught me off guard, but I'm like, okay. So then I go on to the next question. Like, when did you learn about this? Not trans, I'm sorry. I keep saying that, but drag queens story time. And when they dressed like really inappropriately, like really sexually, right? And I'm like, okay, that's the thing. And then they said, I said, well, when did you find out about that? And it was pretty recently. Like they found out about it like within a month, but somehow it had spiked to like their top hot button issue, right? And then I asked this sort of question about the news sources and stuff, and they go, and they say things like, well, I don't need to because I know I'm right on this kind of thing. Like and you get that, and I've seen that with other things too. Like even I think an abortion is one where you see people say, well, I don't know, I'm not going to listen to the other side because I already know I'm right. So I think that's an example of this not. That we can kind of tune out, even that we just had a whole conversation for like an hour about, using good information sources and trying to have an open mind and wanting to know have evidence for our position, stuff like that. And then you kind of get to this hot button issue and all that shuts off. And now it's like, and I'll see that. And it's not uncommon to see that with people across the political spectrum.
That's fascinating. So now I want to talk about identity.
Yeah.
Because, at least in my own theory of identity, like there are things that we just know. I mean, my canonical question here, like if I said, you, David, what is your favorite vegetable? Do you have one?
I guess, I like a lot of vegetables, but I would say, I guess if I had to pick a favorite, it'd probably be peas, maybe
Yeah,
peas.
Don't fuck up the podcast, man. Just give me a vegetable.
It's like you're overthinking it, dude. Well, that's that's my nature.
Right.
So we'll go with peas.
Okay, peas. Because then I could ask, well, why?
Right.
And maybe maybe you go, because like little green balls. That's not going anywhere good. But but sooner or later you get to the point where you go, because because.
Sometimes, yeah.
So. I think you do, like with a vegetable, I think so.
Yeah.
And I think so. Go ahead. Do you have a thought?
Well, I was just thinking this is taking me to something that I've looked at a fair bit, which is you probably also may know about, like this idea of street epistemology, and sometimes it's called deep canvassing.
Yes, I've heard of it. Keep going. So I'll catch up.
So this is an idea that you, by that second question where you say, why do I like the peas, that actually engages a different part of our brain. Right, because now we have to do that rationalization to ourselves why we like it, like why I like it. Like if the question initially was instead, do you like peas or not? That's pretty easy. That's right there at the front of our brain. We're going to say yes or no.
Sure.
Probably. Most people are going to say yes or no. Maybe you're indifferent. I don't know. But anyway, you're going to say one or the other because it's kind of right there. But now when I say, well, why do you like them or not? That activates a part of your brain. And then when I really say, give me a number, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is I would murder someone if they gave me a pea, and and 10 I would like murder someone to get a pea. So now give on that scale, because you want the scales to be really extreme because you don't want them to sort of say to always sort of jump to 10 or 1, right? So you want the scales to be a little bit extreme so that they are more likely to have to think about it a little bit more.
Yeah,
and so then
murdering
maybe I say
a person's pretty extreme.
Yeah, pretty extreme. Maybe that's too extreme, but anyway, you get the idea. And so then they have to pick. Then you make them pick a number, and you'll watch their brain start to go right. They'll look up. They're like, oh wow, what is the number, right? And that activates another part of your brain where you actually are now starting to apply a number. And now I'm going to apply a third piece of this. So let's say I said I'll give it a 7, and I'll say, well, why not an 8? Like you said, 7. Why not an 8, right? And now that activates even another bunch of processing where I now have to think about that some more. And anyway, so that flow is one way to really start it, because that's where you have to now ask yourself. And so if you think about like how might I change somebody's mind on peas? This would be the way to make them, at least, because they have to explain it to themselves. And all you're doing with that process
Sure.
is creating the space for them to maybe be open to it. So if the topic instead was, where do you stand on trans people, or something related to that,
drag queens in the library.
in the library. Well, because by the way, I went and researched this afterwards, and the one thing they cited was like there was a case that happened in, I think, Denmark or Holland or something one time, in the 80s or 90s or something like that, where there was somebody, a drag queen that was dressed very provocatively reading books to children, right? Okay, so and that's the kind of thing you often, and that brings me to this other question you should often ask, which is, am I getting the full story here? Like somehow they got triggered because somebody told them it's just rampant. Drag queens dressed provocatively are reading to your children, right? And nobody stops and says, is that true? Like, is that really happening? And I think that happens a lot because once you've engaged that outrage part of your brain, that logic part that says, is this true, shuts off, right? And they know that.
Sure.
Right? And they use that against us, right? So anyway, I don't know. That was a lot of weird stuff going on there, but
no, I thought it was great because actually just to follow up on that, you have to. I've heard that too. Oh my God, what are drag queens do? They're reading to our children. Like the libraries across the nation are just lousy with drag queens. Sitting there with her bouffant hair or something going, would you like me to read I'm a Hungry Caterpillar to you? Like they're just standing outside the door or something, like grabbing, like pulling kids off the street.
Right.
Hey kid, come here, I'm going to read you the Hungry Caterpillar,
Yeah.
I don't know how that ever became like even something to debate. But let me move on. You said you used the phrase change somebody's mind about peas. And I guess that's where I would not want to go, because I think when we think about identity, it's like there are certain things that you're not going to change your mind on without empirical evidence, like experiential evidence. Because like if I were to say, why do you like peas? Like you at least at one point have to have eaten a pea, right? Like presumably you ate a pea so that you can go, well, I liked it. Right? It's pretty good. What are these? They're peas? I'll write that down so that in case I'm ever on a podcast and get asked, I'll know what to answer. And maybe you end up getting a bad batch of peas or something like that. Maybe you get, British mashed peas or something like that. And there are so you get some experiential data that you go, well, this refines my idea of it. But I still think there are aspects of ourselves, aspects of our knowledge that we know, but we don't know why we know it, other than we do. And my point on this was to say that I've used this before because people have gone, well, how do you know you're a girl? Like, how about if I just say that? How do you know you're a girl? And I go, well, because I like all these things. Do girls do this? They go, yeah. But how do you know that you're a girl? And I go, but I like all these things. I just told you all the things. Like, aren't those girl things? And they go, no, but how do you know? And it's like, there are things that I know that you're just not going to be able to go further than because I know them. So, but that was somebody trying to change my mind. Well, how do you know? Oh, okay, yeah, so maybe you like wearing skirts, but plenty of men wear skirt, fucking Scotland, right? That's something. That's a thing. So, where was I going? I ended up just wanting to tell a joke and, so identity, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead. Do you want to?
Well, so one thing I want to touch on there, because we talked about changing minds. Is that one is that I definitely, on my show, I sort of advocate for not being a person that intends to go change minds, but it's something that listeners always think they want to do, right? And we go into these dialogues, and they want kind of what's the magic solution to changing anybody's mind. And by the way, there isn't one. And
no.
And often it's the wrong strategy. Like you should not go into a conversation with the intention to change someone's mind. Like I always talk about, especially a sort of difficult issue. I like to look at it. I like to go, if you go into a mindset sort of like we're detectives, like Amy, you and I are going to try to understand why we see this thing differently. And we're going to go do that together. Now we're on the same team. We're on this team to understand why we see this differently. That's a much better way to make progress on for both sides, right? And the other side about in terms of people changing mind and all that, they always think, I think we talked a little bit about this before, this always idea that I'll just give you more facts and that's going to change somebody's mind. And that's not,
Right.
all the science shows that's not how people change minds. That's not how it works. And yet we still do it. Like we just do it all the time. And a lot of that is our just naivete that we believe that with those same facts, someone else is going to interpret them the same way and come to the same conclusion and all that. And obviously it doesn't work that way. So yeah, I mean, that's one thing I just wanted to make sure I get out there, that I'm not in the business of changing people's mind.
Oh, no, I knew that, but good point. Yeah. You don't want somebody going, oh, is that guy going to try to change, everybody's mind? He was like, damn it. It's a good point though. And that, how do I want to pull this? I do know what I want to say, and I guess because it has to, let me try to stop stuttering first. There we go. I think we want to change minds because we want what we know without really knowing how we know it. We want that to be the social norm, and we have this we butt up against this idea that we are individuals, but we have to exist in a society. So we have our own origin of identity, this core set of knowledge that we have, as well as an experiential part on top of that. But we have to figure out how to make it in a society. And I guess this is where I was going to try to move things, is that when you have somebody who gets outraged like that quickly, I don't think you're going to get somebody who gets outraged about peas. Like if you go,
right.
Look, I don't like peas, and somebody's going to, oh, that's it. I'm coming after you. But when you have enough people, maybe this is a mob, hive mind, mobs think, whatever the term is, I forget. But, people who are standing there holding bags of frozen peas going, peas, peas, peas. And somebody comes in and goes, I don't really like peas. Then you might get somebody who gets hurt. So I guess that's what I'm trying to say is that with outrage porn, I don't know, does it challenge their identity or does it challenge their ability to fit into a social environment? I would guess it's less personal identity and more, I'm concerned if I don't believe these things, I'm going to be ostracized in some way.
Yes. Oh man, you're opening so many new avenues to pursue. But yeah, no, absolutely that. And I, in many ways, I use the term identity to almost mean that, right? Where like I identify as being part of this group, and that's now become part of me. It's become part of my identity. Like I see myself as a Steelers fan or whatever it is, right? And it's really become. And if it's political, obviously, this is where a lot of this comes into be a problem. Is that we've really taken more, and politics used to be less and less. Falling into people's identity like that, right? I mean, just a thing you had over there, and it wasn't. You weren't so married to it in all these deep emotional ways, and that's now become a sort of a problem because we sort of politicize everything, and we have to decide who's behind this. Like, I don't even really know or care about the issue yet. I want to know more about who's behind it, and then who's behind it will tell me whether I should be for it or against it or not. And
yes. Ugh.
And this creates all kinds of mess. Like this is this comes back to, you said, this fear of being ostracized or being kicked out of your tribe.
Right.
And many times we're for multiple tribes, but in general, especially these political ones, have gotten really big in our lives. And it's our social network. It's all this other stuff. And there's a great quote, and I'm sorry I can't remember the person. I can probably send it to you for show notes. But she's a social scientist that works in this, and she says that the fear of social death is greater than the fear of physical death.
Yes, I think I'm going to use that. That's an amazing quote.
And that's what drives so much of this, right? So, I mean, that's what drives so much of this is that, we have to take this side because we're so afraid that we'll be kicked out of our tribe. And, there's so much there's so much research about this and theories about this, about how this is kind of part of our evolutionary psychology. And we were a tribe species. That's how we survived. We sort of traded muscles for brains, and we also traded muscles for organizing and working together. And that is part of our life. Like if we get kicked out of the tribe, we can't survive out there in the wild by ourselves. We have to be part of a tribe. And so it's just such a deep innate. It's equivalent to dying, basically, or like as this researcher says, it's worse, and we see it as worse, and so it just totally puts us in flight or fight and panic mode.
Yeah.
And something else about that I'm now forgetting that I wanted to make sure I brought up too. That it relates back to that. Hopefully it'll come back to me because it's really an important piece of that fear, like you mentioned, that fear of being kicked out of the tribe.
Because while you're thinking, because evolutionary psychology, I think, is a fascinating topic because it's patterns of, we have to think about patterns of cognition and patterns of behavior, not genetics. The biological evolution, takes place through random mutations in the genetic material. But evolutionary psychology takes place at a cultural level. And so I guess what I was going to say there is that, yes, tribes certainly, having a tribal identity helped. In fact, that's actually partly where we believe the words gender and genetics come from, because it comes from an idea of tribal identity, a Proto-Indo-European root implying tribal identity, like family. But my point was going to be that, ultimately what we're doing in our culture right now, from an evolutionary psychology standpoint, will destroy us. Because what we do is tear each other down. We don't have a cultural identity anymore. And when you don't have a cultural identity, the culture dies. I mean, we've observed this. Arnold Toynbee has observed this over and over since, Mesopotamian times. So, he wasn't around then, by the way. That's a historian. Do you know Arnold Toynbee, by the way?
I think
that's
so.
His name. Arnold Toynbee? I think that's his name. He has a whole series of books about cycles of civilizations. That a civilization comes together and they go, oh, we can do such great things. And then everybody goes, yeah, we're totally doing great things. Then they do great things. And then somebody goes, I don't think we're doing great things anymore. And then there's infighting and the civilization dies. I mean, that's ultimately how it happens, because it loses a sense of cultural identity, which has to come from individual identity first. So that was going to be my point with evolutionary psychology. I'm going to look up make sure I got the name right. Did you remember what you were going to say?
Yeah, what I was going to ties into that as well, right? Because one thing I wanted to say there is like outrage, and it's a little bit. We talked a little bit about this in the beginning too. Like sometimes you should be outraged. Like it's actually a legitimate thing that you should be outraged about. Like maybe we should be more outraged about some things, right? And,
right.
and in terms of that evolutionary psychology, I mean, the theories around that, or that outrage itself, kind of stems from this idea of enforcing norms, right? So
yes,
that was kind of moral outrage, was the way we enforced these norms and kept the tribe on the same path, right? And kept everybody, in line with whatever those tribe parameters were.
Yeah.
So that
social norms,
and social norms, and so we don't, outrage can be useful. Like, I mean, if we get out, there's not much going on and it's calm and we're all outraged about this one thing, we could then, actually, do something about that. But if we're just sort of swimming in it, right, we're just kind of, it's everywhere, it loses all that effectiveness. We're just mad about everything all the time. And I think another piece that's good there is that these identities and tribes are actually potentially good too. It's just, it can be, right? I mean, there are good tribes and there are bad tribes. There are sort of, pathological ones and there are productive ones, right? So that's part of it as well. That right now we're caught up in lots of pathological tribalism, right? That's not productive and not getting us anywhere.
Right. And actually, I think I'm no evolutionary psychology expert, so just to put that disclaimer out there. But it's when that becomes a pathological tribe that the civilization starts to fall apart. I did get the name right, by the way. Arnold Toynbee, Toynbee. And I'll stick this in the show notes if anybody cares. But he was an English historian. Fascinating thoughts from him. But I'm curious, too. I want to have another question that I want to bring up. Because I think when you get to a point where you have a pathological tribe, I'm curious if that's when the outrage becomes recreational. Go ahead. You
No,
already have an
go ahead,
answer.
go ahead and finish. But I loved when I saw you use that term recreational outrage. I'm like, oh yes, we got to talk about that. But anyway, go ahead.
So I actually lifted that term. I got that term from John Michael Greer, who is actually a blogger from whom I learned about Arnold Toynbee as well. So there you go. But I believe he's probably using the phrase recreational outrage to imply more what you're talking about. That we that we open up social media because we want to be outraged. We just go, oh yeah, it's those dummies on the other side. What are they doing? But I believe that there are also people who want to sow outrage for no purpose other than, oh, I guess that's it. Yeah. No purpose other than, hey, I'm sowing outrage and this is fun. Have you seen that? Do you observe that? What do you think? I'm going to stop.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's obviously that first case, and we've kind of already talked about that a bit. But yeah, there's also that second case, like you're saying, that, I mean, there's folks that do it for sort of secondary reasons, like it's, they're trying to get your vote, they're trying to get you to click, they're trying to get you to, do all that stuff. But yeah, then I think there's also people that do it recreationally, right? It's a pastime. Like it's a manipulation. Yeah. I think it's a control thing. Like if you look at what psychologists talk about, that is kind of like what it is with trolls. It's like a power thing. Like they probably have other issues in their mental health, that this is a way to, and all the evidence shows it doesn't actually achieve the goal they want, like, or the goal they think it does, right? Because all of that is not actually aligning with their values and things like that. So it's sort of the wrong kind of neurotransmitters that really don't have any long-term good effect. So they're not even really getting the benefits that they think they are out of it. But it feels good in the moment sometimes. Like I can I can get this sense that I'm smarter than you. Look, I tricked you into being mad and this kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a lot of that.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually out there as well. Then that doesn't help, right? So you get the people intentionally doing it, trying to manipulate us, and then you get all those people that are just doing it as a pastime.
Yeah. And it struck me too. It just struck me. There's also professional outrage. I mean, it's crazy to think, but yeah, I mean, I think we have people now, we pay money just so that they feed us outrage.
Yeah.
I mean, I could use the, no, I won't use it. I was going to say I could use the canonical example in the transgender community, and I won't.
No, yeah,
I don't want to get attacked.
A lot of people use like the merchants of outrage, and there's of course the outrage industry is often used, the outrage machines, all that stuff. So yeah, there's definitely all those players that are, you're absolutely right, that are just, like you say, the merchants of outrage.
Yeah. Well, so let me use a different. Let me use something. I don't even care how I want to put it. Because at least in the transgender community, oftentimes the people, how do I want to do this? Sometimes people start transition and then they decide, I don't like this, I'm going to detransition. Statistics indicate, like actual large, scale statistics indicate that generally gender affirming care has has better than a 94% success rate, that less than 6% of people go, I don't really care for this. And of those, something like 85% of that 6%, so like 4%, detransition for social reasons. And yet, you will see people out there who detransitioned, and they have this huge platform now, because what they can do is they can feed the hate machine, the people who go, I hate those transgender people anyway, those transgenders. Sorry, maybe I should use it as a noun, and then it gets even worse. So you have people who will feed that. And I'm curious, at least on some of them, did they really transition? Did they give it a good go? Did they really want to transition? Or are they calling themselves detransitioners to gain a platform? I always wonder that, because there are also people who go, I used to be a staunch Democrat and now I'm a big MAGA fan. And you go, really? Were you? I was like, if we checked your voting record,
right?
Or are you just trying to get a platform? So that was a big long tangent, but hopefully that made my point better. Professional outrage people now possibly lying to us about them having outrage in the first place.
Oh, 100%. I mean, that's probably crosses all kinds of segments of hot button topics out there, right? I
Right.
mean, there's probably somebody that said, I used to be a drag queen that, went to the libraries all the time. And like, they never did that. It never happened one time. But
And now I voted for Trump. Yeah, I used to
Yeah,
be a
now I
drag
voted-
queen library person.
yeah. Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, obviously, some of these have been uncovered, and it's nonsense. But
Right.
and it comes back to though that also comes back to, it opens up a whole nother thing, that even when it's proven to be nonsense, like people still
doesn't
eat it up,
matter.
right? It doesn't matter. It doesn't
Yeah.
change anything, because it's what they
Right.
want to hear. And like I say, this is true for people on the left and right, and people all over the spectrum with all kinds of
Yeah.
different issues.
Yes.
But yeah, you definitely see this, that. You get these people that have totally been debunked. Like but it doesn't even matter. They get to, most of the time they get to keep doing it. I mean, you see a lot of this in the sort of QAnon world, where they're never right. None of these predictions ever come true,
Yeah.
or they even got arrested for it, or they got,
Right.
the Pizzagate guy broke into the pizza. Well, that guy actually now recently got killed by the police, but
Oh gosh.
yeah, the guy that went into the pizza parlor and threatened and thought there was a basement of children being molested and stuff there, and I don't know if you didn't hear about this. Oh, this really happened. Yeah,
No, wait.
there was this Pizzagate conspiracy running around, that a bunch of different people are, and there was this idea, there was like these communications for some of Clinton's people, Podesta and some others, and they kept saying, I'm going to order a large or something like that, because they were going to pizza at the office or whatever. And there was this whole theory that no, they were really ordering children at the pizza parlor, and the children are being held in the basement at the pizza parlor.
Oh boy.
And this thing kept escalating until literally a guy believed it so much, he went to the pizza parlor with a machine gun, and was threatening people
Oh
there.
shoot.
Luckily,
oh
nothing.
my gosh.
Yeah, and luckily nothing. Nobody was injured by that, and he was detained by. He was captured by the police, and he was charged for that, and he went to prison for it. But then recently, that same person got out, and obviously had struggled. So it's kind of a sad story. And then because it might have been one of those police suicide things where that.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
but so that's the result of that. But yeah, it's an example of how we can get so married to these ideas that even despite all evidence, like there's no basement in that building, but did that change anybody's thinking about that theory? No, it doesn't
Right.
change it at all.
Right. It's what's funny, it just struck me. We've been recording almost 50 minutes, okay?
I know. I apologize.
No, I love this. The thing is, what struck me is we've only talked about how crazy it is that we have this outrage. And I know, because I'm looking at it, you have the Connors Institute and Starts With Us. And presumably these are ways that we can try to withdraw ourselves from this all of the outrage. So after we've spoken 50 minutes, can you give us like 3 on how we stop doing it? Right? Because I know nobody's going to stop. I mean, but we got to give equal time.
Well, I think, for individually, I think a big piece starts individually for yourself is just be a little bit more mindful of it. So be mindful of the media sources, and that if you are going to tune into a partisan show, they are probably going to try to rally you up. Like, just kind of be mindful that that's going to happen,
Right.
and keep coming back to that question of, are they giving me the full story? Like it's almost like that emotional trigger where I'm really getting mad. That's probably the signal to say maybe there's more to this story. Like they might have left some more context out of it. There might be more there. So, but maybe not. Like maybe I should be this mad. That's sort of okay too. But just kind of have that keep that in mind, that they're probably trying to make you madder than you really need to be, and more upset about an issue that maybe you don't need to be that upset about. So that's one thing you can do individually. Obviously, in others, you can do some detox, and just kind of once in a while it's too much, just tune out, do some other stuff. Like there's no guilt in that. Like, you got to take care of yourself first. Like you can't help anybody else. What is it? The put your mask on first kind of thing, right?
Right.
So don't feel guilty if you need a detox and get off, and you need to take a break. Like you want to be an activist, that's great, but all activists need to take breaks too, right? So you don't feel guilty about that. I think collectively, what all the experts are sort of coming to, and what we've seen when people have gotten out of this, or countries have gotten out of this around the world, there's all this idea of somehow there has to be like a rock. It's almost like a drug addiction kind of thing, where there has to be some kind of a rock bottom where we realize we don't want to be like this anymore. What concerns me about that is I'm a little bit, how bad does the rock bottom have to be? Because it's already pretty bad, and we've already seen some pretty bad things. So that concerns me a little, is when we hit rock bottom, will there be a path out? But some of the practical ways of, I think one thing you can do to also help with this is focus a little bit less on national issues, right? Maybe you can get involved more locally, because it's harder to have impact to these national issues. It can be frustrating, but you can have more impact locally. Often, maybe there's some organizations right in your town you can work with, or in your area, stuff like that. But when we talk about getting out of it in the big picture, I really do think this is a bottom up thing. This is not going to come from leadership. They don't know. They don't have the incentives to do it, right? So that's not going to come from the top. This is going to come from underneath. And I think one thing about, I hate to, we come back to Trump a lot, but and they're sort of always worried about not doing that too much. But one thing you can say about him is that movement was a bottom up movement. That did not come from Republican Party. Did not want this guy, right?
Right.
In the beginning, they really didn't want him. I mean, now they're okay, we got to be with him now. He's our guy. But that movement came from the bottom up, right? So I think just an example of how movement, people think, well, we can't do anything from the bottom up. You can do things from the bottom up. So that's one thing. And I think one of the ways out that seems to be most promising, besides just a lot of perception, eliminating a lot of the perception. We have a lot of misperceptions about each other, and that's hard to get rid of. But one way you can help with that's sort of productive, and I think it goes beyond just these kind of dialogue things, which I have no problem with. Like if you want to participate with a group like Braver Angels or Crossing Party Lines or some of the others, living room conversations, you can get some practice having conversations with people with different views, which is good. Doesn't hurt to have that kind of practice, because we don't get it very much in our real life. But beyond that, you can the ways, I think a big way out of this is starting to actually build stuff together. So that might be as simple as, in your neighborhood, maybe you need to do some, maybe there's a community gardening area and you need to just do that. It may start as small as that, but when you throw yourself in those environments where now you're probably going to run into people with different perspectives, and you'll get to know each other as real human beings. Instead of the caricatures we always believe people are, right? Right. So you can actually learn that people, they have kids and they go to schools and they care about this, and you'll find that they're more like real people, and that humanization can really help. But beyond that humanization, if you're actually working on something, so maybe that goes beyond, maybe it does mean get involved locally in school boards or some other local issue that is happening in your town, in your community somewhere that you want to participate in. If you go do that, you'll now be exposed to people that maybe have the different perspective on that issue. But you'll have to go through that process of coming up with what are our shared interests here and how can we go do something, because that's the real way out of this.
Mm-hmm. I think you just said build a cultural identity.
Right.
Which is local, but ultimately, put yourself into a cultural identity that you can actually touch, see,
it's larger.
feel, hear.
It's larger than that political identity you currently have, right? Something that's bigger than that, with a shared interests, right? I think that's And doing stuff is where it becomes real, though, right? It's the talking stuff is great, but I don't have an incentive to really keep doing that necessarily, right? I have to work at that, which is good. You should all do it. But when you're building stuff together, now we have like a real stake in it, because we're trying to achieve something. So I think that building stuff can be is a big factor in how we get out of this. And starting locally, I mean, it's the only way, because you can't just jump into Washington, D.C. and make something happen.
I think that was amazing. I appreciate that. I think that's great advice. I mean, one of the things that I've just use the drag queens in libraries. My response has always been, well, go see that happen.
Right.
Because if all you're getting is, somebody else's secondhand, I was outraged, and you go, well, then I am too. Go and watch one of these things, I have always tried really hard to make myself available for people to talk to, because it's like, well, I think as soon as you meet somebody who is a transgender person, like just trying to live, you go, oh, they're not that weird. I mean, you can look at me and go, well, there's probably something wrong with Amy too, but other than that, but other than that, I think people see like people instead of issues. and that becomes I think that's very powerful. So I appreciated that. Can I ask you one more question?
Sure.
Time for one more. So Meta just recently, have you seen Meta's new changes in hate speech policy? Okay. I decided I'm going to leave Meta properties because, it's not, by the time this airs, I will have been gone for almost a month. Not really, a few weeks anyway. But somebody said to me, well, now you're going into an echo chamber. And my opinion, and this is going to be what the question is, my opinion is that what Meta is doing is actually setting up an echo chamber, that by making sure that people like I am won't actually say, contradictory things for fear of being, jumped on and called mentally ill and whatever else, Meta now considers perfectly viable. I think Meta is setting up the echo chamber, not me. Like, I'm going to go to platforms where I can talk, and at least I might have the ability to moderate, the discussion. So what is your thought on that? That was my opinion. What do you think about me leaving Meta properties? I think is maybe my question.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's a really important topic, and it's very discouraging. I mean, this is like, very, very discouraging pattern of what they're doing there. In terms of, what you're deciding to do. I think that is a personal thing. And I think both are totally valid, right? If you make the decision, like, I don't want to deal with that and I don't want to be part of it, and I also want to sort of protest it by getting off, I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do. And I also think those that say, look, I need to stay there because I want to be an activist and I want to represent, I think that's perfectly valid too. And you got to do what works for you, because these things take emotional energy, right? Whichever decision you take. And none of us have just like an unlimited amount of emotional energy, right? We have to focus that in ways that work for us personally and also work for us in this sort of larger, how is it helping me achieve the things I want to achieve? So I think both are totally valid. It's almost like the idea people ask about in this world with global, with climate change and stuff like that. Why should anyone have kids? Well, you can make each argument. I think each argument is totally valid, right? You can say, yeah, I don't want to bring a kid into this. You can also say, I want to bring in a kid into this and hopefully educate them about this, and maybe they'll make the world better. So, I think both are totally reasonable positions to take, and it's kind of a personal decision. And I hope, frankly, that, that not all transgender people just bail, right? Because I think they need to be there. But I totally get the idea of that's not for you. Like, that's not what I'm going to do. Yeah. And I think that's totally reasonable.
I think it was, now I have more terminology because now that you and I have spoken, I think what relaxing the hate speech policy does is not foster free speech, but foster recreational outrage. Yeah. Well, then I think that's the point. Because, you can see it already happened on X, right? Elon Musk says, well, you can say anything, and I will silence people who tell you can't. Well, there's a bit of irony in that one, actually. But I think, so maybe that was the better way to think about it, is I think what it will do is not foster free speech, which is, a transmission of ideas. I'm not even sure what the words are. Like a discussion, a discourse. It goes from being a discourse to people trolling. Like, now it becomes fun. People go, "Ooh, cool! Gosh, now that 4chan shut down," and I don't know if it did, but now that I can't do this in whatever place because I got banned, now I can just go to Meta properties and hack on everybody there. So I think that's all it will do. So.
Oh yeah, no, I definitely don't support the policy, but yeah, no, it's definitely going to have that effect. But I do worry about there not being a representative. Like you say, like when you get to, I think one of the things you said is that you're just trying to get by. Well, that's what people have to realize. We're all just trying to get by. Like
yeah.
We've got the same problems everybody else has. Regardless, of all those aspects of our lives.
Right. Because, I mean, there are social media networks where YouTube is a good one, right? Interestingly, same with TikTok, which we've got a ban for, the Chinese government censoring people, which is sort of fascinating that we don't have to talk about that. But, there are social media networks that even if they're not perfect, at least give me tools to moderate the content as I would want to. And I try really hard to engage with people where they are. I mean, I think that's hard. I think when you go, sorry, I didn't understand this. Okay, you called me a mean slur. Why are you doing this? And because I've turned those conversations around before where somebody has gone, you're a dummy. And I go, well, how am I dumb? You don't believe this. Oh, well, this is why I don't. And they go, oh, dang, well, actually, maybe that's a good point. And I go, cool, do you want to talk about it? And then we have a conversation and, I've made friends actually like that. That doesn't make me great. That just means I'm trying to be willing to meet people where they are. And I think when you have people who clearly don't want to contribute to the conversation, I think it's important to be able to go, you know what, we're not going to allow you in it then, because if you don't want to contribute, I'm happy just to hide your comments. So anyway, yeah, I agree with you as well that I think there's going to be a mass exodus, and then I think there are going to be people who go, well, I'm going to hold on, I'm going to make this better. I just think that's a delayed mass exodus, but because sooner or later you go, I can't do it. It's too much.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like I say, we only have so much emotional energy for all this stuff, and I think it's the sign of it is so. I mean, I think it's in some ways maybe it's a wake up call a little bit for people to realize that we don't have much control over what happens on these platforms, and so like you were mentioning, like you're more comfortable on YouTube right now, but they can change anytime they want to. Who knows what direction they might go in. And so this is a big challenge for, so that's what I think that's an area where I'm really concerned is what, how much control is kept in such a small number of companies. Right. And it could be really hard to find alternatives where there's spaces, to have these conversations. Right. And that's a huge concern for me. And how easy it is to control that space now is like, it's, we thought the internet was like this democratization idea, and it is in some ways, but the power is still very centralized, right? It's kind of the same problem.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Now it's just, the control is global as opposed to local. Like if you were to say, well, we're going to ban books from our local library so that the drag queens can't read them. Like that's one thing. But then when you go, well, I want to take all copies of this book off of the internet, and I want to make sure that all recordings of drag queens reading this book are eradicated from YouTube. I mean, it's like that becomes much more difficult, but it's still possible. Right. You can still have YouTube write a piece of software and go, can I find drag queens reading this book? So
well, and I will say that's one place where potentially podcasts can stand out, right? Because we have a little bit more control. Like we're at the whim of our hosting provider, but it's pretty easy to go move to another provider. Now we're still at the whim of the podcast players. Will still read RSS feeds and all that. If that were to go away and somebody wanted to make that a walled garden, that could happen, I guess. But as long as there's podcast players that work with RSS feeds, that's one place where we have a lot more freedom to move around if our hosting provider decides to shut us off.
Yeah, agreed. So hopefully we'll see more of that. The Mastodon type model, the Blue Sky type model, where things are just like, this is totally open, And
distributed, right? Where the control is distributed.
Yeah, right. So, all right, let me ask you this. How do we find David Beckemeyer on the internet?
Well, the easiest way to find all the stuff about the show and the various shows we do is at outrageoverload.net. And I'll say that I don't know if maybe I have a funny speech impediment or people just have a hard time with it, but people often hear outrage overlord. So that's not it, but outrage overload. So it's like an overloaded truck, right? Overloaded brain. So outrageoverload.net is the place where you can find the show and also the other shows we have, as well as all the places, all my contacts are on there, all my socials. But I am Outrage, or the show is Outrage Overload on Instagram and Twitter X and Facebook and and Blue Sky. Yeah, we're also on Blue Sky.
Yeah. Oh, I did see Blue Sky. Oh, dang. Okay, well, I'll find you on Blue Sky then. But I did notice that only on Mastodon is it not Outrage Overload. Was it taken on Mastodon or?
Oh, I guess that's true. I guess I didn't get around to creating a second account. So I have my personal account on there. So yeah, on Mastodon, you can find me directly, David Beckemeyer on Mastodon.
Yeah, David Beckemeyer. Yeah. I'll put all the links in the show notes, but obviously, yeah, outrageoverload.net has all of the most updated links. Did you register the domain Outrage Overlord just so that you could redirect?
I did, yeah. And it's a parody site, so you actually might be entertained by it.
Oh my gosh, really? Okay, we'll have to go and look at that. I would have just redirected because somebody once called my website Gender Identity Daily, and I was like, crap, it's Gender Identity Today. So I just registered the domain and I have a redirect, so people go, oh, I thought it was something else. But
well, that would probably be the smart thing to do, but I thought I'd have some fun with it. So I put up a little comedy site that then all the links take you back to the main site. If you click anything on that site, you go to the main site. But
all right. I am going to look at that. That's funny.
Yeah, outrageoverlord.com if you want some entertainment.
.com, okay. Yeah. Right. Because that should really be a commercial venture, right? If you're going to be an overlord of outrage, make sure that you're for profit, that you're doing that.
Right, because you got to grift. Grifters got to grift.
Exactly. Grifters got to grift. I think that's the way we got to end that. So David, let me tell you, when we spoke, a couple of months ago or 6 weeks ago, I really felt I connected. I really appreciate the work that you do. So I want to say thank you to you for doing that, because I think it's very important work. I respect you very highly for what you do there. So I want to say thank you.
Well, thank you.
Oh, sure. And then I will go ahead and do the shutdown here. I'll just say, I am Amethyst Herrick. I've been speaking with David Beckemeyer on Gender Identity Weekly. And we've been talking about recreational outrage porn. I can't even say it all. And how grifters gotta grift. So thank you to our listeners. And thanks again, David.